Coming up on Primetime News, the head of Korea's spy agency denies allegations that it wiretapped civilians, even offering to put his job at stake. The Korean government teams up with local companies to create over 200,000 job opportunities for young people by 2017. And today marks the 62nd anniversary of the Korean War armistice. We take a look at what this day means and what we can expect for the future of the two Koreas still technically at war. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome to Primetime News on this Monday, July 27th. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us.
The head of Korea's spy agency put his job on the line in response to allegations that his organization spied on civilians to influence the 2012 presidential election.
And he made the confident remarks at a meeting of the National Assembly's Intelligence Committee. Our Choi-Yu-sun starts us off.
According to a lawmaker outside the closed-door Intelligence Committee meeting, National Intelligence Service Director Lee Byung-ho said that there were no illicit activities concerning the NIS's purchase or operation of a hacking program developed by an Italian firm, and he offered to stake his job on the assertion. The spy agency chief is also reported to have said that the controversial program, the remote control system, is incapable of tapping into the KakaoTalk mobile messaging system, a smartphone application widely used in Korea. The latest allegations against the NIS came after the recent revelation that the spy agency purchased the hacking program. While the agency has admitted to buying the program, it said it was for spying on North Korea, not South Korean civilians. But the apparent suicide of a spy agency employee who was involved in the program has further raised suspicions. Regarding documents deleted by the employee before his death, the NIS said its restoration of the documents shows there was no surveillance of civilians. But with the agency declining to submit original copies of the log file, the opposition party will likely continue to question the credibility of such claims. During a separate meeting of the ICT and Communications Committee, the opposition party zeroed in on the fact that the NIS didn't report the hacking program purchase to Parliament, which is required by law. The ICT minister said that a software program like the one the NIS purchased is not considered a wiretapping device and does not require government permission for its use. With the ruling party accusing the opposition of threatening national security with a political agenda, it's likely that the hacking allegations will continue to be a bone of contention between the rival parties. Choi-Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Moving on to the latest MERS outbreak in Korea, with the last remaining person under quarantine having been released today, the government gears up to declare a technical end to the outbreak. Our Han Da-eun has the latest.
A nurse infected with the MERS virus by a patient she treated at the National Medical Center has been released from quarantine as of midnight Monday. She was the last person under quarantine. The number of suspected patients quarantined peaked on June 18th, reaching nearly 6,730, but continued to decline during the past month before zeroing out on Monday, 68 days since the first case was confirmed in May. As no new cases have been confirmed for 22 consecutive days, the Health Ministry is set to hold a meeting presided over by Prime Minister Hwang Ji-hye on Tuesday, declaring a technical end to the MERS outbreak. The final tally of MERS cases stands at 186, with 36 deaths. Health Ministry officials are also expected to encourage citizens to resume their normal lives without concerns, as the virus no longer poses a threat to general society. The official end to the virus, however, is expected to be announced at the end of next month, as the World Health Organization suggests a period of 28 days after all of the remaining MERS patients test negative in diagnostic tests. Currently, 12 MERS patients remain in Korea, with 11 testing negative. One patient who has shown mixed results is set to undergo further testing this week. 한다은, 아리랑 뉴스.
Shifting gears, as part of measures to bring down Korea's youth jobless rate, the government has set an ambitious goal, creating 200,000 job opportunities, including 88,000 full-time jobs. Our Shin Se-min has the details.
Ko Sung-myung is a 26-year-old college senior with no full-time job lined up. And like many of his generation, he's anxious.
I hear that the job market is in critical condition, with thousands unable to find work. All I can do is just continue submitting resumes.
The number of young, jobless Koreans has increased sharply, going up to 410,000 during the January-June period this year, up 100,000 in just the past 2 years. In order to quell the rising youth unemployment rate, Korea's finance ministry and 6 business associations, including the Federation of Korean Industries, have agreed to work together to boost job creation. They aim to create more than 200,000 job opportunities by 2017, 40,000 in the public sector, and the remaining 160,000 at private firms.
The companies that hire more young people will be provided with financial and tax incentives.
With the measures, the government aims to raise the youth employment rate by 1.8 percentage points. But some experts say that might not be an easy task, as the plan isn't a cure-all for the dire youth labor market.
It's not enough. The number of unemployed young people will keep on rising, because more students will graduate every year. More promising number of jobs by corporations must be in the works.
Experts also point out that a new set of measures to help highly educated young Koreans cope with unemployment is another necessity, and that the jobs the government creates should be long-term positions. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
In other news, Mitsubishi extended a formal apology to American POWs for forcing them into labor during World War II and is set to provide compensation to forced laborers in China. But the Japanese firm says the situation is not the same for Korean laborers. Our Kim Ji-hyun explains the strange logic of Mitsubishi.
An outside director of Japan-based Mitsubishi Materials Corporation drew the line when it came to extending an apology to Korean laborers. In an editorial to the Sankei Shimbun Monday, Yukio Okamoto said the legal situation of Koreans is different from that of other prisoners of war, such as the U.S., Britain, and Australia. Okamoto argued Koreans were technically Japanese citizens and were treated the same as all Japanese workers during the period. This is in stark contrast to the corporation's apology to surviving World War II prisoners of war and family members in the U.S. last week, as well as its stance regarding Chinese laborers. In the same Sankei article, Okamoto said the company views Chinese laborers in the same light as American forced laborers. He did add that it would take longer to resolve issues with the Chinese, as descendants are suing for financial reparations, a reference to the company's settlement announced last week to pay $16,000 per person in compensation to 3,765 victims of forced labor in China. Korean civic groups say the private corporation needs to discard its double standard on wartime atrocities and requested that a similar apology be made. Korea's Hwang Ji-hye District Court ordered Mitsubishi Heavy Industries Limited in June to pay 5 Koreans a total of $482,000, which the company appealed. It's estimated nearly 6,500 Koreans were forced to work for Mitsubishi-owned companies since the country was colonized by Japan in 1910. Kim Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
Ahead of nuclear talks between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo later this week, the U.S. has called on North Korea to come back to the negotiating table in light of the recently signed nuke deal between Iran and 6 world powers. Our Connie Kim has this report.
The U.S. is willing to be flexible with North Korea, just as it was with Iran in negotiations on a recent landmark nuclear deal. Sidney Seiler, Washington's special envoy to the 6-party denuclearization talks, said the U.S. is open to dialogue with Pyongyang and willing to engage in a wide array of issues. Seiler is currently in Seoul, where he met Monday with his South Korean counterpart Kim Gun and other officials on ways to deal with Pyongyang's nuclear provocations. Seiler also said North Korea must learn from Iran's recently inked deal with the U.S. and other world powers, and that it should take a different approach toward coming out of its diplomatic and economic isolation. The talks between the two envoys come amid speculation that North Korea could launch military provocations to coincide with the anniversary of the founding of its ruling Workers' Party in October. South Korea is the first leg of the American envoy's three-nation trip that will also include stops in China and Japan later this week. Kim and Seiler will meet again on Friday for discussions with their Japanese counterpart Shigeki Takizaki in Tokyo. There, the three are expected to discuss comprehensive ways to bring the regime back to the denuclearization talks. Seiler's trip comes just after Seoul's top nuclear envoy Hwang Ji-hye met with Chinese officials, including his counterpart Woo Da-wei, in Beijing last week, where he asked for China's support in dealing with North Korea. The six-party denuclearization talks involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia, have been stalled since 2008. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
The hostilities in the Korean War ended with the signing of an armistice agreement at Panmunjom in 1953.
And to commemorate the 62nd anniversary of the historic event, a special ceremony was held at that venue today. Kim Hyun-bin brings us this report.
The Korean War started on June 25, 1950, when North Korean forces, supported by the Soviet Union and China, launched a surprise invasion of South Korea. Over the course of the resulting conflict, 21 UN member states came to the defense of South Korea, with the U.S. providing the vast majority of the UN's military personnel. After a bloody back and forth that lasted slightly more than 3 years, an armistice agreement was signed on July 27, 1953, closing one of the most harrowing chapters in Korea's modern history. Some 180,000 South Korean and Allied troops lost their lives in the Korean War. But those numbers pale in comparison to the estimated 1 million South Korean civilians that died or went missing.
The losses were devastating, but their sacrifices will forever be remembered, as they give South Koreans what they enjoy today: freedom and a prosperous nation.
To commemorate the 62nd anniversary, a ceremony was held on Monday at the Joint Security Area of Panmunjom, the very location where the agreement was signed in 1953 by military delegates from the UN Command, North Korea, and China. Deputy Commander of the UN Command took the moment to mention the importance of the command's role in the region, especially when dealing with the Communist North.
Today, the armistice reflects the enduring commitment to the international community to preserve peace and stability. Its maintenance continues to be a complex task, especially when noting the provocative actions of North Korea. The nation's pursuit of nuclear weapons, long-range ballistic missiles, and proliferation of weapons in violation of UN Security Council resolutions continue to threaten stability in this region and in the world.
The ceremony not only served to mark the signing of the armistice agreement, it's also a solemn reminder that the two Koreas are technically still at war. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News, Panmunjom.
The honorary consuls from the 21 UN member states that supported South Korea during the war were the guests of honor at a special event hosted by National Assembly Speaker Chung Ih-hwa.
And there he thanked them for their contributions of troops and aid. Chung also welcomed 8 descendants of Korean War veterans from 7 countries, including the U.S., Australia, and Thailand. The event was co-hosted by the Korean War Memorial Foundation, established in 2010 to promote cultural exchanges with the UN countries and provide scholarships to descendants of the war veterans. The South Korean government has long commemorated the Korean War Armistice Day.
And since 2013, Korea also honored veterans from the 21 UN member states. Our Park Ji-won tells us more about the day and its history.
The more than 3 years of bloodshed that began with the Communist North's invasion of the Democratic South on June 25, 1950, officially ended with the signing of the Korean War Armistice Agreement on July 27, 1953. It was one of the longest ceasefire negotiations in history, involving 158 meetings over a span of 2 years and 17 days between the U.S.-led UN Command and the North Korean-Chinese coalition.
The first round of negotiations was held in Kaesong in July 1951, but the talks were later moved to Panmunjom, near the present-day border between the two Koreas. By then, the war had already fallen into a bloody stalemate, with a growing number of casualties on both sides after Chinese Communist forces backing the North Koreans conducted a massive offensive against the South Korean army, backed by the US and 15 other UN member states, including the UK and Canada. Agreement on the armistice was finally reached when both sides accepted the terms for a system of voluntary repatriation for prisoners of war, and when South Korean President Lee Seung-man, who was against the armistice, finally accepted it, though only after receiving a promise from the U.S. for a mutual security treaty and a major aid deal for the South. With the signing in July 1953, all military actions were immediately halted, ending the war that had killed and wounded roughly 3 million civilians and soldiers on all sides. The armistice created the demilitarized zone, a 4-kilometer wide buffer zone that is now the de facto border between the two Koreas. It's not much different from the 38th parallel, which divided the two Koreas before the war. But now, 62 years after the signing, the main goal of the Korean Armistice Agreement still has not yet been achieved. The preamble states that the purpose of the agreement is to ensure a complete cessation of hostilities until a final peaceful settlement is achieved. But that final peace treaty has not yet materialized, leaving the important task still to be done. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Also, to mark the occasion, we turn to a Korean War veteran turned politician for his perspective on the conflict, as well as his hopes for the two Koreas going forward.
Our Hwang Ji-hye sat down with Congressman Charles Rangel in New York.
So, Congressman, how do you remember the Korean War?
I try not to remember the Korean War. I was 60 years ago, 65 years ago. And it was a nightmare, a nightmare. I try not ever, ever to think about the tens of thousands of Koreans, Americans, and people from over 20 countries being killed. But if you talk about stopping communism and the Republic of Korea blossoming to become an anchor of democracy in that area, then I wish the war wasn't necessary. But there's no question that God has been good to Korea in the recovery.
You've been honored as a war hero. How has your participation in the Korean War changed you?
Having the type of casualties that we had, you wonder, why did we survive with all of the wounded and the deaths that took place? So there's a sense of guilt, because the heroes are the people that gave their lives. Their families have changed, and they're not here to see the results of that war. I can never think of a more gracious people than the South Koreans, because wherever I go, there's flowers, there's medals, there's recognition, and I really accept it for those who lost their lives.
As a man who fought in the Korean War, how do you assess the current situation of the divided Koreas?
How that imaginary line, that 38th parallel, can divide cultures and people with the same blood. I didn't volunteer to say, take me to Korea, I want to get involved in a war. But I did get involved. And I have an investment in Korea, not by choice. And I have an opportunity, not as just a guy on the street saying what a sad story, but a senior man in the Congress, and being able to say to the North Koreans, what's more important than bringing your Korean people together?
You are one of the longest serving House member in the U.S. Congress. What would you like to see the most happen on the Korean Peninsula before your term as a U.S. Congressman comes to an end?
I hope that one day, no matter how strong a communist is, that they think about their children, their grandchildren, the value of peace over warfare. And I hope that that happens while I'm in Congress, and I'll be working through those goals if I'm not in Congress. I can't make a major change, but I can be a part of that, working toward that goal, and I enjoy doing it.
Thank you, Congressman, for your time today.
Kamsahamnida, it's been a pleasure being with you.
Let's now turn to Lee Sun-ho for the top international headlines of the day.
Sun-ho, today the Chinese stock market took a hit. Let's start right there.
That's right. China's Shanghai Composite Index fell 8.5% today, raising questions about whether the government can actually stop a market crash at this point. Though it was able to stabilize markets back in June and July, this time the slump was the largest daily percentage decline since 2007. This is causing investors to be concerned about Beijing's possible reluctance to help the stock market in the future. That may be pointing to even a greater danger, which is the slowing down of China's economy. Now, data on China's industrial profits shows a drop of 0.3% in June compared to the same period last year. The drop in stocks was also felt all the way in Europe, especially with the share price of German exporters.
Like BASF down 5%, many of the German automakers down 3 to 3.5% today. And these, of course, are all very Chinese-centric companies. The sentiment, at least, around them is. The automakers, of course, have had a marvellous time selling their luxury cars into China over the last 5 or 6 years. But sales are starting to dwindle.
Analysts were puzzled as they could not explain the magnitude of the sell-off, particularly during the afternoon hours. Even still, some investors in China remained optimistic as they feel the market has bottomed out. And rising tensions in the Middle East as Syrian Kurdish forces have accused Turkey of ongoing attacks across their border. Turkey replied by saying it was investigating these claims, but insisted that the Syrian Kurds were beyond the scope of their military efforts. The Kurdish People Protector Units, or the YPG, claimed that Turkish tanks had attacked a Kurdish-held village inside Syria late on Sunday evening. But on the coming Monday, the Turkish Foreign Ministry denied this, saying Turkey did not bomb any Kurdish YPG positions. Meanwhile, the Turkish police have continued efforts to arrest those suspected of being a part of ISIS or the Kurdistan Workers' Party, also known as the PKK. Now, as of Monday morning, they had detained dozens of suspects in a series of raids. Tensions have been rising between Turkey and Syria lately after the Islamic State suicide bombers targeted Syrian Kurds last week. Turkey struck back by sending in its own fighter jets and ground forces against ISIS in Syria, but also into northern Iraq, belonging to the PKK, on Saturday. The Marxist-Leninist group has been a nuisance to Turkey for years. And a sad day in entertainment as the only child of late American pop star Whitney Houston, Bobbi Kristina Brown, has died from irreversible brain damage 6 months after she was found unconscious at her home. Reports say that she was placed in a medically induced coma, although this was not confirmed by her family or the hospital. The 22-year-old was discovered in January unresponsive and face down in a bath by her husband, Nick Gordon. Now, he tried to revive her until an ambulance came and took her away to North Fulton Hospital. Bobbi Kristina's father is an R&B singer. His name is Bobby Brown, and both of her parents had battled drug and alcohol abuse. Bobbi was known to have been hospitalized twice with anxiety following her mother's death and was sentenced to jail in 2013 after confessing to driving while drunk. Bobbi Kristina began a career in music at the young age of 6, often performing alongside her mother, and later appeared on the reality show The Houstons on Our Own. And that does it for your international news update for now. I'll see you again tomorrow.
We're
We kicked off the last week of July under sweltering conditions. Heat wave alerts were issued in parts of the southern provinces, and Ulsan was the hottest, with highs reaching up to 35.5 degrees this afternoon, with a heat wave warning in place. And the heat keeps building along with the humidity, meaning the level of discomfort should be very high across the nation, as we can see. So it's better to stay indoors during the afternoon and try to keep cool and drink water frequently. Now, taking a closer look at tomorrow's temperatures, the daily high here in Seoul and Busan will rise up to 31, while Daegu and Gwangju will peak at 34 and 33 respectively. And as for the other regions, it seems like Daejeon and Jeju Island will see a high of 32 and 31, while Dokdo rises to 28. Now, we're not done with the rain just yet. We'll get a final soaking on Wednesday here in the capital, though it should remain sunny down south. But apart from that, there's no rain in the forecast for the time being, which should be good news for those of you taking a summer vacation here in Korea. Well, that's all for the weather. Good night.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching.
We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye for now.